conversation is often diluted as to the events that lended itself to what happened on the 19th and moving on to the 25th. There's a lot of questions that has been asked. There's a lot of questions that would continue to be asked. And we give God thanks. And very often when we talk about the element of thanksgiving, we talk about the U.S.'s involvement as part of what some may call the rescue mission. When we talk about the revolution, we talk about a lot, of course, the revolutionary aspect of it, CORD, Maurice Bishop, and everything else. The October 17th. But it's not very often we get to look at it through the eyes of the unsung heroes, very often that you call them, and that is that of the Cubans. Grenada's relationship with Cuba and how it helped to shape the revolution and how it has helped to shape our lives as it is now today. I have with me a man who is a former executive member of the executive member of the Maurice Bishop Patriotic Movement. He's been through, participated in 3 general elections. He's a local scholar. I would call him local historian. Humble man. And many, when you see him, if you only know the things that this man is capable of, the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge that he sits upon. Good morning, Brian. How are you?
Good morning, JC. And how are you doing in the cold box, in the freezer?
In the ice box.
In the ice box.
I am giving God thanks and praise that at least I have the ability to feel.
Well,
some people.
I'm also giving thanks as well to be here this morning, and thank you for having me to talk about one of my topics, which I usually write about, Grenada-Cuba relations.
And I know you're very passionate about it.
And I'm very pleased that we're in a position to say that, and humble too, to say thank you to all the Cuban internationalist assistance we have received from 1979 to the present.
Okay, before we get into that at least allows us to get into the conversation. Now, Brian, let's put this into perspective, because the Grenada-Cuban relationship can be split into two separate periods. It can be split into 2 separate periods. Let's put that relationship into context for us. Prior to the events of 1983, and then there is a post period, of course, when diplomatic ties was actually restored. So let's talk about that. The establishment of that relationship with Cuba, and how everything translated itself to what transpired during their involvement during the revolution.
Thank you, JC. Grenada and Cuba established diplomatic relations on April the 14th, 1979. 1 month, 1 day after the triumph of the Grenada Revolution. The announcement was made in a mini rally, which I think was the first major public activity of the new government at the Old Queen's Park Pavilion. Ambassadors were exchanged. Richard Jacob was our first ambassador, Grenada ambassador resident in Cuba, and Julian Rizzo was a Cuban resident ambassador here for throughout the life and time of the Grenada Revolution. Now, if you look at the way how things evolved after that diplomatic relationship was established, you saw that a number of things started happening. Cuban internationalist workers in terms of in the medical field started arriving in Cuba. By September 79, hundreds of scholarships were given to the government for Grenadians to go away and study in Cuba. In 1980, you saw Palm Island came with all the equipments for the construction of what we call now the Maurice Bishop International Airport. Okay, as part of, some of the of the very important international assistance that set in stage or set in motion what we can, what was developed during that period at a rapid pace.
Right.
There's something that we had, things evolved really quickly between 79 and 83. Just imagine the airport was almost completed. Okay, by the end of 1983, there were so many hundreds of Grenadians studying in Cuba. In fact, there were almost 400 Grenadians in Cuba studying when the revolution imploded. So, that relationship, saw very much not only diplomatic, but people-to-people relationship. And I want to point out that I really want to take the time to point out here that Grenadians traveled to Cuba just before the turn of the 20th century in search of a better life and never came back.
So hold for me, Brian.
Okay.
Let's put it in, because very often when you hear about Grenadians migrating in search of a better life, you hear about, of course, those who went to Trinidad during the oil era. You hear folks who live here left during the 40s, the 50s, the 60s to go to the UK. But it's not very often. You highlight, you taking us into a frontier that not very often you hear about. Grenadians leaving to go to Cuba for a better life.
In my document, Grenada-Cuba relations 30 years and counting, I pointed out that people-to-people relationship started before diplomatic relations were established. Okay, so for example, right in St. Paul's, when I came up from Cuba in '86, my neighbor told me he had a brother that went to Cuba and nobody knew, he never, they knew nothing about him. And also there's a gentleman whose uncle worked in the pharmaceutical industry in Cuba and returned to Grenada after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. So, even in my community, there are instances whereby people can talk about the family going to Cuba then and never coming back, or who managed to come back.
Let me ask you, Lindsay, Brian, do you sometimes get the sense that we've been brainwashed into our philosophy, our thinking as to the type of country that Cuba is? We talk about it in terms of the posts and the sanctions and some of the misgivings that we hear about it. Do you think all of that has led to a brainwash in terms of how we see Cuba up until this day, while we're benefiting as a nation from them?
Many of us who were selected to go to Cuba during the revolution were considered as people who were quote-unquote conscious. And some of us still had doubts as to what kind of country we were heading to. Okay? Even though we were selected and supposed to be at a particular level. But on reaching Cuba, all that disappeared almost overnight. Almost overnight.
How so?
Based on, we didn't realize that Cuba was such a concrete jungle, so to speak, quote unquote. They had so many high-rise buildings, and you can look and you see no mountain, only buildings high up in the air, especially in Havana, and Cuba flat. So in Grenada now, before you look, you see some mountain in the distance.
Right.
The mountain we were seeing in Havana is high-rise building, if you understand what I'm talking about. So, that kind of took the wind out of the sails, and then start seeing people interacting and how they function. Not knowing the system, but looking at how people operate, you get a good sense of what was taking place in the country.
Talk to us about that, because I mean I've heard stories, and unfortunately the stories, they take a negative tone. I'm having lived there, and have been able to appreciate what has happened to Cuba over the years, from the period of the Cuban Revolution and the US's involvement in Cuba to what Cuba is today, paint it, go ahead and you talk about the high-rise building. Let's talk about some of the other elements of the economy, the way of life.
But Cuba's way of life different, a little bit culturally than us. In terms of the national dish, the national wear, the national dance, and all that. But you have to understand, with the propaganda machinery of the empire of the United States is geared towards Cuba, we in Grenada here, who have no idea of what life is really like in Cuba and the effects of that negative propaganda, plus the effects of a blockade which officially started on the 7th of February 1962, when the blockade officially started. Now you will, based on the things that you heard and we heard growing up, you would think that Cuba is or was located in some other part of our galaxy. Because the propaganda was really negative. It took us going to Cuba, losing in Havana City, going to the last bus stop of a particular route, crossing the road, getting another bus, and come back, just to figure out, just to get a feel of the way how the people live. That propaganda has not changed. And in recent times, it got a little worse with the advent of the new administration in Washington towards Cuba and the Cuban people. It is unprecedented. But again, there is unity. Where there is unity, there is strength. And I think the Cuban people really understand the purpose of the United States and the propaganda, the negative propaganda against their country, their leaders, and their economic system.
I think very often we are misguided and we do not look at the history itself. And I think a lot of times, if we ourselves, we stop to read and put the dots on the map, we will see a picture clearly being painted for us. But let's come back to home. So a relationship that started back in the 1890s. Here we are, Grenadians migrating to the to Cuba, and a relationship that blossomed beyond measure during the period of the revolution. Let's get into some of the hardcore details of it. Cuban involvement here at home, and some of the real transitionary elements. We talked about scholarships. There's the airport, different things. Let's talk about that. How Cuba really and truly, they were able to impact our lives, and the effect of which we still realize up until this day.
Well, that's right. That impact continues unabated. Just recently, the government of Cuba offered 12 more scholarships for Grenadians to study in Cuba, adding to over 50, I think it is, that is still there. Okay, so that impact continues in various forms, scholarships and solidarity. Now, when diplomatic relationship was unceremoniously severed after the invasion of our country, relationship continued with the advent of the formation of the Maurice Bishop Patriotic Movement on the 29th of May on Maurice's birthday, 1984, in St. Mark.
Okay.
One of the objectives of the MBPM was to continue that relationship, which the Kenneth Radix and George Luzon re-established after the demise of the Grenada Revolution, which resulted in the MBPM receiving over 50 technical and university scholarships, and were involved in various solidarity meetings with Cuba before diplomatic relations was restored on the 10th of March 1992 by the government of Sir Nicholas Brock. But before, that diplomatic relations was restored on March 10th, 1992. There were some problems. Cuba had donated a world code for all the equipments which were being used for the construction of the international airport. Now, according to the evidence, all those equipments were dumped. Okay? Cuba had asked for them, but they were dumped. They was not given them. So they took the airport. But at the same time, Cuba wanted to become a member of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. So there was some bickering going on. And before that happened, I think Dora Payne Banfield had to present the Sir Nicholas government position towards a CTO meeting. When that was done, Dr. Marichaud traveled to Havana to talk as leader of the Maurice Bishop Patriotic Movement, and who, in my opinion, between those years from 1986, when he returned to when diplomatic relationship was established again, he was like the unofficial ambassador. So what happened? They came to a compromise. Okay, Cuba dropped the case against Grenada.
Okay.
Became a member of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, and then that set the stage for the re-establishment of diplomatic relationship in 1992, on March 10th, 1992. It is important to note that the person who traveled to Havana to present his credentials was former Prime Minister then, he was the Minister of Tourism then, Mr. Tillman Thomas.
Quite interesting and informative. That unofficial tie that remained with the Maurice Bishop Patriotic Movement, and I said unofficial ties. How important was that period as it relates to maintaining the relationship with Cuba, and up until the time that official diplomatic ties were actually restored? How important was that period?
You see, that was very important. I mean, it was highly important to keep that established relations, diplomatic relations, well, unofficial relationship, or what we call solidarity relations.
Right.
With Cuba. It is very important. It is very important to continue, because let me tell you something, it is something that the Grenadian people wanted also. The MPPM did not only receive scholarships during that time, but also there was a young lady from Grand Roy who traveled to Cuba to have she had an open heart surgery, you understand, at the expense of the Cuban government. So that kind of solidarity and that kind of relationship was very important. It was like setting the stage for the continuity until now.
Dr. Keith Mitchell, he traveled to Cuba in April of 1997, paving the way for the visit of the late primary Cuban leader, Fidel Castro, his visit a year later. Looking at it, how historic a moment was that for the Grenadian people and the Cuban people and Grenada as a nation?
JC, in some quarters, when I told some of my friends that I'll be going back to Cuba after Carnival in 1983 to do an intense political course, they tell me I'm crazy. They say, where are you going? The international airport going to open in a few months. Fidel is likely to come. You understand? So what it is, I say, listen, I go win some emulation and I will be landing on a plane too, they never could tell. So they say, boy, you really like to dream. So Fidel visit was something that people anticipated for the 5th anniversary of the revolution, when the airport was carded to officially open. That was a major thing. I mean, people was like, wow, the international airport will be opening officially. Big plane coming from all across the world landing. And it was, it was an occasion whereby, for the first time in Grenada's history, there was a project that started within a particular period and finished within a particular period. And then that would have just changed the whole economic situation and economic and political and social situation in the country um, because of that event. But that didn't happen, and we know why.
Right.
By Dr. Mitchell going to Cuba in 1997, April 1997, really set the stage for the PZL visit to finally happen. You understand? And that was a major historic moment. JC, I have a pic of me, you know, the clothes I had on to go to the reception, the only thing was me. Because, you know, it was really a major historic occasion. People came in from as far as Antigua, okay?
Right.
To Grenada. Antigua, St. Vincent, St. Lucia. In fact, a friend of mine, we were in school together between 83 and 84 from St. Vincent. He came to Grenada and he lived with us. You understand? So we had an idea that people was hooking up with family here, and people hooking up in, you know, guest houses where coming in. So it was a major event, not only for Grenada, but that was the only time something like that was going to happen in his lifetime. So people seized the opportunity to come from across the OECS,
Right.
to come to Grenada to be part of that massive parade that was on the airport to welcome.
Historic is historic. It actually was. It actually was indeed. We're keeping our eyes on the clock. It is 24 minutes gone past the hour of 9 o'clock in the morning time. Speaking here with former member of the Maurice Bishop Patriotic Movement, former executive member, and a man, of course, who's had the opportunity and the luxury of being studying in Cuba and experience. He's wrote a lot. He's wrote extensively about the Cuba-Grenadian relationship. Brian. And we know this is a conversation that can go on and on and on. Like yourself, a number of Grenadians, they've had the benefit and the glory of having gone to Cuba and having studied. And there are an untold number of them. Are you able to highlight some of those individuals who certainly their contribution upon the sands of time would remain forever, and we see them, we interact with them on a daily basis, and it is because, of course, of the revolution and that relationship that started then and continues on now. Certainly you can feel free to highlight some of them and the roles that they play and the positions where they are in society this day.
But look at it from the point of view of medicine. The first set of doctors, I think it is well established and known that Dr. Marichaud studied in Cuba, and you know his whole role in and his contribution towards, well, his struggle and contribution, because you know he didn't work for 4 years between when he came back from Cuba. He only regained the right to work during the first NDC's administration.
Why so, though? Well, you had it.
But Dr. Marichaud was the leader of the Maurice Bishop Youth Organization, which was formed in Cuba, and that was mainly political. When that happened, he was out in the country. In fact, he was on a speaking tour in the U.S. Okay, when what happened, when the decision was taken. I think the doctors who came back, they were in struggle with the authorities here, whether it's to do 1 year internship or whether it's to do 2 years internship. And some people, and most of them felt that, okay, well, we will do the 2 years. And they went ahead and accepted the government terms, and Dr. Marichaud refused. And he ended up doing his internship 90 to 91, if I remember. And so he did 1 year. You understand? We set the stage for the rest of the doctors in the future to do the 1 year internship. In the area of engineering and construction, there are several engineers that made some serious contributions towards the development of the country. I think I have the right to call Kenny Gabriel. You may not know Kenny Gabriel and Associates. He has made, he had made serious contributions. He's a structural engineer. But I was an engineering student, so I know mainly some of the engineers, if not all of them, that came back in 1986-87.
Right.
And there's a friend of mine who got, if not the last MBPM scholarship to do his engineering course. There's the Barry Engineering.
Okay.
So, when Wilson, he's a vet, he was an MBPM scholarship. So, people who got scholarship during the revolution, Dr. LaRose, Dr. Kendrick Banfield, all these people were scholarships. And then there's a couple technical personnel like Clark in St. Andrew, Nolan Clark, Jonathan Francis, and quite a number of others. Refrigeration. So there's a lot of technical people who train to work alongside engineers. So there's quite a few. I mean, the list goes on and on, JC.
And we can also say before we take the break that there are even persons within our current administration who's had the luxury, the NNP administration.
I won't call her name, but she's my friend.
Right, I'm saying, and I know that, but I'm saying, just to put it in context, people can aware, in case you're wondering, there are people even within the current administration that has had the luxury of being a beneficiary.
Establishment also, and
within the GBN as well. No names, we're not going to call any names. But what we are going to do, Brian, we'll take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll take a little closer introspective look into the events, of course, and we hear very little of it. The fact that 24 Cubans, I think, and Brian will always correct me on that, but it's 24 Cubans who died during that upheaval here in our home back in 1993. Quick commercial break. 83. Quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. GBN Television News at 7, a pulse on all things Grenadian. Look out for our new features through expanded synergies with our media partners in Barbados, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Trinidad, and beyond. Capturing the latest in news, sports, weather, and entertainment. Credible, informative. Thank you for making us number one. News at 7, live, Monday to Friday on GBN Television, Channel 7 and 11. K105.5 and 105.9, Hot 98.5 and 98.7, GBN Television Facebook page and YouTube channel, and www.gbn.gd. GBN, with you anywhere and everywhere.
Let's Cook Grenada, a practical culinary guide to local cuisine. Learn new ways to prepare your favorite foods or try different menus from various locations across the island. Let's Cook, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. on GBN Television, Channel 7 and 11, GBN's Facebook page, and GBN's YouTube channel. If you miss it, catch the repeat Thursdays at 10 a.m. and Sundays at 3:30 p.m. Breaking barriers.
Going beyond the ordinary. Examining the stories beyond what meets the eyes. GBN gets to the meat of the matter. Join us on GBN Television, Classic Radio, gbn.gd, or on Facebook via your smartphones and other devices. We take you beyond the headlines every Monday night at 8:30 p.m. We are GBN, rated number 1.
The stories have to be told, because very often it is filtered and diluted and we don't get a true picture of it. Yesterday was the 25th day, the 25th of October, and it has been for the last 37 years being observed as Thanksgiving Day. Brian, while we hear, in most respects, when we talk about Thanksgiving Day, in most people's mind, it signals a period where we give thanks for the intervention by the U.S. forces together with other regional counterparts. But not very often, and I'm saying that on the backdrop that depending on which side of the political fence you sat, you probably may have say, praise the Lord, hooray, or otherwise you may have a frown on your face. But very rare, Brian, do we talk about the Cubans who sacrificed their lives to enjoy the sort of luxury that we have here at home today. Not very often you hear much about that conversation, do we?
Well, it is true, and most importantly, our own history, our own recent history, which they are included in. Because if we're talking about the building of the international airport, until today, as I said in one of the documents, Grenada-Cuba relation may have dominated our time and space for the last 41 years. Because in every instance, from since 79, they were involved in either the development of the country or the development of our human resource for the future development of our country. Unselfishly, if you understand the blockades, if you understand the cruelty of that inhumane, and someone might say criminal blockade against the government and people of Cuba, if you understand also that when they help people is a major sacrifice, they are contributing based on international solidarity, and for especially the third world countries. But in recent years, there are some working class Americans family from the United States who began studying medicine in Cuba. So, it is, the impact is tremendous. The sacrifice is tremendous. Look at the present situation that exists in the world, in the present COVID-19 pandemic. Look at how many Cubans, members of the brigade Henry Rivera, International Medical Brigade, that traveled, I think, to more than 20 countries.
Right.
And then assistance. So it's not only Grenada, is as if they're on a mission. They are on a mission for a better world.
And
okay.
It's important you said that while you were 25 minutes on to the hour. For those of you that's probably home, radio, television, if you want to chime in and make a contribution towards the program, I mean, the number on the inside is 435-2041, 435-2041. I mean, feel free to engage us. Yes, Brian.
Yes, I was saying, in my last document, Grenada-Cuba turns 41. And then I said, we in Grenada, we have more than 41 reasons to sing loud on Block Cuba.
Right.
You understand? Because the blockade for almost 60 years has cost between the two countries billions of dollars. The figure too long, I can't remember. The cruelty of that blockade is that, let's say for example, there's a medical part that some machinery need in Cuba. Okay, that part
just hold for me, Brian. We have a caller online. Classic, good morning. You're live.
Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Mr. Kedo. Yeah, I just want to say something concerning this whole revolution. While I don't dispute the fact that some people went abroad, got scholarship, become doctors, become engineers, become what and what, Grenada have a population of 110,000 people. What happened to all the people who were put in jail without even trial and killed and tortured during the revolution? We must have we must be fair when we're talking about these things. But some people just come in and big up the revolution because they benefited. What about the other people who are hurting, whose relatives were tortured and killed? All the people that put on their heavy manners. I'm glad the revolution came to an end. It was a terrible period in Grenada. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. 435-2041, and no doubt, as we always said, we continue to say, Brad, that 37 years on, the emotions that resides within the bowels of a lot of Grenadians remain as real as it did back then. But we don't want to lose the focus of the conversation.
No. Because
I think very often it is easy to do that. But go ahead, Brian.
I did not hear a word the lady said, the caller said. I did not hear a word.
Oh, you didn't hear? Oh,
I didn't hear a word. Because listen, Grenada-Cuba relations has a lot of emotions attached to it.
Right.
If you can't manage that, you will find, you have to manage that emotion. Because it is very emotional.
24 Cubans sacrificed their lives, Brian, as part of the Thanksgiving ceremony, Thanksgiving observance. There was a ceremony that was held 9 o'clock on Sunday. Do you think enough is ever done as part of the Thanksgiving observance that focuses on the contribution of Cuba in its involvement, not just in the period of the revolution, but in the period of Grenada's development as a nation?
Continued contribution.
Yes.
I think that when Grenada-Cuba relations anniversary comes around, which is the 14th of April, I think it should be a big thing. It should always be a big thing. I mean, throughout the length and breadth of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Both from a Grenadian point of view and both from a Cuban point of view, even though it is international solidarity, but there's a price attached to it. There's sacrifice attached to it, okay, and there's goodwill attached to it. So we, in my opinion, we do not make enough noise. Okay, if the noise we are making, it is not loud enough. It is something that we should really sing and shout about and, give thanks, tell them thank you. Then, it's just like acknowledgement,
right,
appreciation. But as always say, JC, they got a 4.5 years of revolution. And let me see how Grenada will look like today.
Because the truth is, and what happened during the revolution, the growth, the progress, that cannot be taken away. Historically, it is there. So, folks, we that's not something that you unequivocally it cannot be argued. We're not going to. But Cuba's involvement in Grenada, it is there. It goes beyond the revolution. Because the revolution is from 79 to 83. The revolution has ended, has come and gone, but yet Cuba's involvement, Cuba's relationship with Grenada, and the benefits, it continues up until this day. So I think we need to be are we willing to separate that period in time? There's a revolution, and there's Cuba and Grenada as two sovereign nations, and a relationship that we have undoubtedly benefited from over the years.
But I think the relationship is kind of one-sided in terms of, in the whole relationship. But, they don't see it as it. They see it as, as their contribution towards humanity for a better world, for a better place, for better people, for better development, for the independence, for the sovereignty of countries. And just on the chime in on the 24 people that died during that invasion. It is somewhat heartbreaking to know that the reason why they died, it is because of our own mistakes here in Grenada. They didn't come to fight a war. They come to help us build an international airport and to develop Grenada.
Right.
But due to the implosion, due to the crisis that erupted in the bowels of the engine, they found themselves, what we say in a quagmire, in between. And when the invasion started, if you know the history of the United States towards Cuba,
right,
they didn't have to do anything for them to die. You understand? So, if you listen to Black Wizard, Uncle Sam, there's a song that, he said that, the only thing they wanted to do was to get rid of Castro. You understand?
And I guess hold for me, Brian. We have a caller on the line. Classic.
Good morning.
Good morning. You're live, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I want to know is now the Grenadian soldiers and them that died. They're not worthy to know something of too. What I'm saying is they're supposed to be when people die in war, is like they have to get honor. They're not supposed to get honor, and up to now we don't know how much Grenadian soldiers that died. We need to know those things.
And that is thank you, sir. And that's thank you very much, sir. And Brian, that is a reasonable contribution that the caller is making. And just yesterday, you and I were having this conversation and that is why we want to. You and I have agreed that this conversation should be continuous. That we look at this conversation from different aspects. We hear about the October. We hear about the 17th. Yes, this morning I spoke with a gentleman who intimated that he was shot, and I mean the memories is still as real. And this, Brian, undoubtedly is a conversation that needs to take on a new paradigm shift and a more nationalistic focus.
I agree, but Jesse, I'm not hearing the contribution making by the callers.
You are not.
I'm not. There's two that go on.
I probably have to see if I can work on get you two batteries for your hearing aid. But
no, it's not coming through. It's a technical problem from your side.
Hold on,
because I'm hearing you.
But
I'm hearing you loud and clear. Maybe people outside too, but.
Hold for me. I have another caller. I have another caller on the inside. Classic. Good morning. Go ahead, please. Good morning, caller. Go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning, CJ. It's a big hypocrisy with this October 25th and October 19th in Grenada history. Because how many Grenadians that died between October 19th and October 25th, and even after the invasion of Grenada by the Americans? We just heard one of the callers saying that all the Yankees wanted to do was to get rid of Fidel Castro after 1959 with the Bay of Pigs. It's no difference whether they wanted to get rid of Maurice Bishop, and the Yankees would have spent the money with those who would have caused the conflict in Grenada between Maurice Bishop and the Code faction. Because when Code went to the Soviet and he had his meeting with the Eastern Bloc, and it was stated that all he wanted to do was to make sure that Maurice doesn't come back with the Western Bloc. And this is a whole situation whereby even you had people from the U.S. Army infiltrating Grenada's National Army at the time. And they were the ones who would have caused the whole turnaround on the fort during October 1983. What has happened to all those people who would have died on the fort? Let me get the truth and the facts about this thing, because a lot of people died. We don't know how many people died. We had the whole, or I shouldn't say the whole, the majority of the cabinet died. Where are the bodies? When America participates in war, all they're interested in is getting the soldiers' remains. They will fight for that. As we say, this is 38 years after this thing has happened. And we would like to know where the bodies are, at least for them to get a justifiable burial. And this could bring some resolution to the conflict that we see here between the various factions in our land.
Okay, thanks a lot, sir. Thank you for the contribution.
All right.
Great, appreciate it. Brian?
Yes, I have different info or during my investigation about what the caller spoke about, okay? But let me just try to zero in on the Cuban constitution.
I realize.
And let me tell them thanks for the continued constitution from since 1979.
Brian, why do I get the chance
that conversation itself, JC, that is part of the continued conversation.
Well, while we at it though, just to put some light to it, and of course, I just got a WhatsApp that was indicated that somebody indicated to me that there was actually ceremony on Sunday.
On Sunday?
Yes, that actually where the Grenadian soldiers they would have been remembered as well. But the point that the gentleman just made, I had a conversation with one of my media colleagues yesterday who actually intimated that only recently they had an interview with the U.S. ambassador to Barbados and the rest of the Eastern Caribbean, and that's Linda Tagliatelle later. And she was intimating, and we've heard before, that a lot of the information that we asking for is sitting in Grenada, that the U.S. government, that is, she said unequivocally, handed those information back to Grenada. And you and I, Brian, we've understood through our own different circuits that the information sits in a particular location on island.
Well, I only get to realize that well, the information we always spoke about is what was actually taking place during the revolution, during the construction of the revolution. And those documents were returned. I heard about that last year when we were looking for documentation for an exhibition for the 40th anniversary of the Grenadian Revolution. And then we learned that they actually had sent back some documents, but which, according to you, it sits on a particular location in a dungeon. So apparently that our history is in a dungeon. So we need to unearth it. You understand? For people to understand what it is that's taken.
Sometimes the information we need is right, as you say, right under our noses, and we're not getting it. Brian, time is always going to be of the essence, and as we progress, we'll see whether or not we need to extend the time. But let me throw this at you. There's a lady I spoke with this morning, a caller who. There's some people who seem to think, and there's the expression that if you live by the sword, Brian, you die by the sword. You live by the gun, you die by the gun. There are those who have argued that the Grenadian Revolution, it was bounded, it was inevitable that it was going to meet its fate sooner rather than later. Whether it's in a context that everything has a time in the season, that it was going to die naturally, but there's some that have hinted that the way it ended, it was just a matter of time. Let me ask you, though, and I'm asking you from a historical perspective, understanding the delicate relationship between the U.S. and Cuba. We've had the Bay of Pigs mission. We have the U.S.'s involvement in Cuba, interaction with Cuba. We've taken it from the backdrop of the Cold War period. Putting that into perspective, Do you think, honestly, that Grenada would have been allowed to flourish and blossom as a socialist nation in the Northern Caribbean?
In the Southern Caribbean?
In the Southern Caribbean, with its northern partner Cuba up there. Do you really think, or do you think it's just a matter of time?
That's a good question. I would say flourish, but under prosecution, because the United States called the Grenada Revolution a virus. A virus which was spreading throughout the rest of the Caribbean, and which for fear that virus may have influence or could have influenced many other Caribbean countries to take the route Grenada is taking. Now you have to understand that, we were under tremendous pressure from the United States. I mean, when the head of the free world, President Reagan, saying that the construction of the international airport is a Russian and military base, that is the big league. You understand? That is a big league. And people who have no idea, even though the international airport project was never closed during the revolution. It was always open. You could visit the project 24 hours because the construction was taking place 24 hours.
Yes.
Okay? Day and night. So, it wasn't in the United States' interest to see a little island like Grenada talk about a consistent 5% growth, and not saying 5% growth and not feeling it, because the social wage which existed during the revolution, people were feeling it. When they went to the hospital, they got health care, they didn't have to pay for education. You understand? Community centers were being built on a baited throughout the island. Voluntary work was a major part, saving the government thousands of dollars. You understand? So that virus was a virus against the United States, and that's why they said that Grenada was a threat to the national security interest. How? The United States is 28,000 times larger than Grenada. So how come this like a speck in the Southern Caribbean Sea could be a threat to the national security of the United States of America?
But I think if you pursue the argument, it was in the context of geographic location. And that's an element of the conversation that very often doesn't get added into, that it had nothing to do with size, but more so in terms of maintaining, because you would have to agree, Brian, that the U.S. over the years, while of course they have been involved in a number of conflicts around the world, never have there been a case whereby the enemies, literally as it is, from the Cold War period, were that close to them. They've gone to different parts of the world. But the fact that you've had Cuba in the north, and now what was seen as part of the expansion of a socialist agenda in the north, certainly you would have to understand, from a military and a security perspective, that must have raised eyebrows in Washington, no doubt.
Oh yes, they're talking that is big geopolitics. The Grenadian model had destroyed the Puerto Rican model, okay, in terms of development and bringing benefits towards the people of Grenada, okay? But, some people found that was too good to be true, so, like I said, I wanted to keep it for themselves and not to let the Grenadian people continue to flourish. Because, mind you, the PRG's level of mobilization internationally was unprecedented. We knew how to make noise. In fact, when you make noise in St. George, people in Washington heard. You understand?
And when Bishop went to the U.S. to make noise, the rest of the world took notice just the same.
The rest of the world took notice. You understand? So in that regard, and that even from a linguistic point of view, even from a language point of view, the United States had problems with the Grenada Revolution, as they said clearly. the leadership of the Grenadians speak English and can communicate directly to the people of the United States. But Morris didn't only spoke English, he spoke it very well. He had command of the English language.
No arguments over that.
So that was a different level, you understand? And, you know, that was something that they couldn't handle, to be quite honest.
And I understand.
So, you know, a little country, 110,000 people,
how dare you,
struggling to have a better life, struggling with an international airport.
I've got a caller, Brian. Just hold for me one moment. Good morning, you live.
Good morning. I would like to ask Mr. Lindsay a question. What was the justification for putting thousands of innocent people in prison and being tortured? I would like to find out from him. Have a good day.
Brian, question at you. I'm not sure whether or not you qualify to respond.
I heard it. You may have to repeat it for me.
So she's asking what was the justification to put in thousands of innocent people in jail. I'm not sure that.
But from a security point of view, there's for the security forces to answer. You know, the issue of security has always been a ticklish one. I am, you know, I relate to a senior journalist in the country, and he said, to be quite honest, in the early days, in the first 2 years of any revolution, you have to consolidate your revolution. So you may have to adopt measures, you understand, which may be unpopular during the consolidation process. The whole idea of detaining people without charge, that was a shortcoming. As I said in one of the documents, conditions that gave rise to the demise of the revolution.
Okay, hold for me. I have another caller. Classic, good morning, you're live.
Good morning.
Good morning, caller, you're alive. Go ahead,
How are
please.
you?
I'm wonderful, thank you.
Right. Now, tell me something. You and your colleague there, really honestly and truly believe that, okay, Cuba had a revolution in 1959, right? Up to now, right, that embargo remained against Cuba by the Americans. For America part alone, right, every man, woman, and child in America would have starved to death, right, for America part alone, and that's a fact. So tell me, you two there really and honestly believe that Cuba, that America would have stand there, watch revolution, you know, happen, flourish, and advancing in Grenada here and do nothing about it? I doubt. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. I mean, I'm not sure whether or not I want to assume, Brian, that the caller has only just joined the conversation, because that question we posed just a few minutes ago, and sir, we agreed unequivocally to answer your question that the answer to that question is no, that the U.S. was not going to sit by and allow that to happen. So whether or not we would have ended in an invasion or whatever embargoes, or you would have taken political dialogue in, we agreed, sir. So I'm going to assume that you've probably joined the conversation late, but at least I'm happy that you are part of the conversation.
Also, quickly is that they were already destabilizing the process. They tried to block funding from the European community for the construction of the international airport. So their intention was clear. If we had to have any progress, we had was to dig deep for that to happen, because they were not willing. In fact, they refused to meet with Morris when he was in the United States.
Yes.
He wrote so many letters asking for normalization, and that didn't happen. As to regard as the Cuban blockade, all the businesses that were nationalized in Cuba after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in '59, everybody else were compensated. The United States refused to take the compensation.
We almost out of time, Brian. Let me ask you, as you raise as we on it, bomb blast, the bomb blast. There are those that have argued that was part of the machinery that was in place to destabilize the revolution. What say you? And it was a hint of things yet to come. What say you?
Agreed. Because those things are not of Grenadian. historically and culturally. That level of violence that we saw unleashed on June 19, 1980 at the Queen's Park,
Yes.
is something is not of Grenadian. It's not of Grenada, and we're not of Grenada unless you have been trained to carry out a particular function. There's a particular group that could have claimed responsibility for that, a particular group of people. There were people who were arrested and in prison for that act and had some form of confession to that. You understand? And it is stated that one didn't go off, so it would have been several.
Right.
Instead of 1 year. Yeah, so, you know, all that was part of the destabilization process, not wanting the Grenadian Revolution to succeed.
So maybe after all is said and done, the efforts from 1979 to 83, it was probably just, as you said, it was just a matter of time. But very often when you see puppets on a wall, Brian, there's a puppets on the wall, but as a puppeteer, there's the hands behind the scenes that allows the motion. And very often those are the ones that you don't see, but they are the important factors into everything. Brian, it is 10 o'clock. We're on the time, bro, but I want to give you a minute just to consolidate where we are today as we look back 37 years on and 37 years on, and we look at the relationship between Grenada and Cuba that has spanned some 41 years.
Well, I will end based on the latter because personally, on behalf of everyone, I think, who studied in Cuba, who had family, who had their children in Cuba, I think we ought to say thank you to the government and people of Cuba for the continued support towards the development of a human resource, which of course will add towards the development of the country. And in this era of the pandemic, we would like to say thank you to the Cuban doctors who left their families in Cuba to go all across the world, including Grenada, to help control and to treat and to deal with the virus of COVID-19. We can't say thank you enough. Okay, it is, sometimes we just take things for granted in Grenada a lot. Sometimes also we just need to say it. Saying thank you, and thank you for what took place, what is taking place, and what will be taking place in the future. I want to say thank you to all the Cuban internationalist workers here and to the government and people of Cuba for the sacrifice, not only in Grenada, the region, Africa, and the rest of the developing world.
Thanks a lot, Brian. And how do we forget, of course, only recently it was the case of that one of those cruise ships that Cuba took in, and it was in the heat of COVID, it was?
Yes, right in the beginning of the pandemic. An English cruise ship, yeah.
And then how do we forget, of course, their involvement in Italy, that Ebola. Remember that Ebola outbreak?
Ebola in Africa.
Cuba, of course, was one of the first persons among many in the early stages of Ebola that would have sent a contingent of professionals to Africa to deal with this.
The Cuban internationalist solidarity in terms of medicine has spanned the globe.
No arguments.
Not only our region, the globe. Let me let you in on a secret. Every night, I listen to GBN News from 7 to 8. And if your international roundup is going after 8 o'clock, I am leaving you and joining national TV in Cuba for their news.
Okay.
I understand. So, you have to be on the ball. It's a subject matter that I am very passionate about. It's one of my topics. Like I said, I had 3 topics that I was right on: Grenada, Morris, and Cuba.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Brian. I know you and I, we really want to push this one, but we've exhausted time. Thank you, Brian Lindsay, of course, a former member of the Maurice Bishop Patriotic Movement, and certainly local author historian. Thanks for your contribution. It is 5 minutes gone past. You've taken 5 minutes off out of our programming lineup. I want to say thanks to those of you on radio, on television for the last hour, and those of you who have shared the morning with me and I with you on this today, a holiday, the 26th day of October. Peace and love. JC loves you. It's always a pleasure being here with you. Have yourself a really, really wonderful day as you continue to reflect and consider and the times and place 37 years ago, our lives, how it has impacted, the influences that has been made by foreign entities, whether it be the U.S. or Cuba, and certainly as we look forward to carving our own path in our neck of the woods as a nation. JC loves you. Have a great one as we continue to sing One Love.